The hallway was a gauntlet, whispers sharp as glass, eyes waiting for her to flinch. Nyla had walked it before, head low, swallowing every word like a stone. But today, something had shifted. When the shove came, it did not send her forward. It rooted her deeper. In that breathless pause, she knew the truth. This was no longer about surviving the day. It was about deciding what kind of person she refused to stop being. The autumn sun had not yet climbed to its highest, but the light was already sharp enough to carve edges on everything it touched. Ridgeview High stood at the heart of a quiet suburban town, its red brick facade framed by rows of neatly trimmed maple trees. From a distance, the building looked almost inviting, windows catching the morning glow, banners swaying gently over the entrance. Up close, the air carried a different kind of stillness, one that seemed to watch and weigh newcomers before deciding whether to let them in. Nyla Brooks stepped out of the passenger side of the family's dark blue sedan. The faint scent of her father's cologne still lingered in the car. Malik Brooks, tall and broad-shouldered, moved to stand in front of her. His uniform jacket was gone now. He had left the military years ago, but he carried the same measured calm that had once commanded rooms full of recruits. In his hand was a bracelet, a narrow strip of dark-woven fabric, edges softened with years of wear. "Hold out your wrist," he said, his voice even, as if reciting a familiar ritual. Nyla extended her right hand. The bracelet was cool at first touch, then warm as his fingers tightened the knot with deliberate care. "Control first," Malik said, meeting her gaze. "Strike later." Her eyes, deep brown and steady, did not waver. "I remember," she replied. "Do more than remember," he said quietly. "Live it." She gave a small nod. Around them, clusters of students passed by, laughter rising and fading like shifting currents. No one paid much attention to the man and his daughter at the school gate, and that was how Nyla preferred it. She walked toward the main doors alone, her skirt brushing lightly against her knees, the strap of her bag pressing into her shoulder. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly of floor polish and paper. Lockers lined both sides, the blue paint chipped in places. Students leaned in groups, voices overlapping in easy familiarity. Nyla's steps were measured, her gaze steady but non-intrusive. Halfway down the corridor, she noticed a glint, a phone raised just enough to catch her in frame. A small group of boys stood there, pretending to scroll but glancing her way. She shifted her path subtly, letting a taller student block her from view. It was a move she had perfected. Change position, alter the angle, stay unremarkable. Still, she felt the weight of their attention. One boy in particular, broad-shouldered and self-assured, followed her with his eyes as if assessing a new opponent. Ethan Cole. She recognized him from the photos in the school trophy case, captain of the football team, smile sharp as glass. His family name was etched deeper than any plaque. His father chaired the school board, a fact everyone seemed to know. Beside him stood Brent Dawson, stockier, built for wrestling mats rather than classrooms. His movements were impatient, the kind that suggested he was always moments away from shoving someone aside. On Ethan's other side lingered Luke Harmon, tall and lean, his posture more relaxed, his gaze shifting between Nyla and the floor. His expression was unreadable, a slight furrow in his brow, as though he were already thinking ahead to something he would rather avoid. Nyla passed them without a word, her expression calm, her pace unchanged. Her desk in homeroom waited near the window, where sunlight pooled in a quiet rectangle. She slid into the seat. Moments later, Sierra Walsh took the desk beside her. Sierra's blonde hair was pulled into a loose braid, her pale hands smoothing the cover of a notebook. She offered Nyla a small nod but said nothing. It was the same every day. Acknowledgement without engagement, as if friendship required too much risk. The first half of the day passed without incident. Nyla kept her focus on the teachers' voices, on the neat arrangement of her notes. Between classes, she moved with care, avoiding bottlenecks where the hallways narrowed. But she could not avoid the feeling of being observed. The glances came not just from Ethan's group but from others, quick and measuring, as if waiting to see how she would react. It was during lunch period that she crossed paths with them again. The cafeteria was a chorus of trays clattering, sneakers squeaking, and conversations building over one another. Nyla carried her lunch to a small table near the back. She had just set down her tray when she felt the air shift, a subtle quiet in the noise around her. Looking up, she saw Ethan, Brent, and Luke standing near the center aisle, their conversation punctuated by glances in her direction. Brent said something she could not hear. Ethan's mouth curved in a smile that was not entirely pleasant. Luke looked down, pushing his hands into his pockets. Nyla lowered her gaze and took a bite of her sandwich, keeping her movements deliberate. By the end of the day, the air in the halls had thinned. Students streamed out in pairs and groups, voices spilling into the crisp afternoon. Nyla walked to the parking lot where her father's car waited. Malik glanced at her as she opened the door. "First day," he said. "And?" "Quiet," she answered. That evening, Nyla sat at her desk, with the bracelet still snug on her wrist. Her books lay open, but her attention was drawn to the glow of her phone. A notification pulsed at the top of the screen, an image posted on a local student feed. It was her, captured from behind in the hallway that morning, the angle emphasizing the curve of her hair and the rich tone of her skin. Across the image, in bold white letters, was a caption twisting both into something less than human. The post came from an account with no name, no profile picture. Underneath, comments were already stacking, some laughing, some adding their own crude suggestions. Nyla stared at it for a long moment, her reflection faint in the dark glass of the screen. Outside her window, the town was settling into night. In the faint hum of streetlights and the whisper of leaves against the glass, the stillness she carried all day held firm. She reached up, touched the bracelet, and let her breath out slowly. Somewhere in the undercurrent of Ridgeview High, a current had shifted, and though she had said nothing, the silence was already beginning to speak. Morning light poured through the east-facing windows of Ridgeview High, pale and cold against the glossy linoleum. Nyla walked through the main hall with the same deliberate calm as the day before, her bracelet snug against her wrist, the knot still tight from her father's hands. The murmur of conversations followed her like the wind brushing along the walls. She was no longer invisible. She could feel it in the small pauses of laughter when she passed, in the way certain eyes tracked her with quiet calculation. The first incident happened before first period. She rounded a corner toward her locker and found Ethan Cole and Brent Dawson leaning against the metal doors like guards at a gate. Ethan's broad frame was relaxed. One ankle crossed over the other, but his eyes were sharp, the way a hawk studies its prey. Brent stood closer to the lockers, arms folded, the muscles in his forearms taut even at rest. "Morning, Ridgeview," Ethan said, his tone carrying a false warmth. Or should I say, he let the words trail, glancing at Brent, who smirked and supplied the rest, an ugly, clipped phrase tied to the color of her skin. The sound of it was like a stone dropped in still water. It rippled outward, catching the attention of a few nearby students. Nyla stopped a few feet away. Her breath was steady. She did not answer. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her bag and looked past them toward her locker. Brent moved half a step, just enough to close the gap. "We are just saying hi," he added, the grin fixed, his tone daring her to object. A teacher emerged from a nearby classroom, glanced in their direction, then looked away as if nothing were out of place. The teacher's shoes clicked briskly down the hall. Nyla's gaze flicked from Ethan to Brent, then to the locker door they blocked. She gave no outward sign of the thought forming in her mind, not fear, choosing the battle. She turned without a word and walked toward the library, leaving them leaning in the space she had abandoned. Behind her, Brent's laugh was low and satisfied, but Ethan's expression held a glimmer of something else, a faint crease in his brow that did not match the amusement in his voice. By mid-morning, the pattern had settled in. In the crowded hall between second and third periods, she found Luke Harmon waiting at the far end. He was taller than the others, with a frame built more for reach than for brute force. He said nothing as she approached, but the moment she stepped into range, Ethan appeared from the side, drifting into her path with a calculated casualness. "Careful, Brooks," Ethan said, his voice pitched for nearby ears. "Would not want to get lost in the wrong hallway." "On." Luke stood behind him, hands in his pockets, eyes not quite meeting hers. Again, the interruption was brief, seconds at most, but deliberate, enough to send a message without breaking any visible rule. A few students slowed, watching from the corners of their eyes. The unspoken verdict hung between the walls. They saw, but they would not step in. In history class, Nyla sat with her notes aligned, her pen moving evenly across the page. The air felt heavier here. The old radiators clanged occasionally against the silence of the lesson. Halfway through, a crumpled scrap of paper landed on her desk. She unfolded it. The drawing was crude, the message beneath sharper, another jab at her background, written in block letters. She did not look around to see who had sent it. She slid the paper into her notebook without reaction. After the bell, she headed toward the Student Services office. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Carroll, was at her desk, glasses low on her nose as she scanned a file. She gestured for Nyla to sit. "What brings you in?" Mrs. Carroll asked, voice pleasant but measured. Nyla hesitated, then described the hallway encounters, the remarks. She did not embellish. She kept her words precise, the way her father had taught her to report a fact. Mrs. Carroll listened without interrupting, but when Nyla finished, she set her pen down with a sigh. "Ridgeview High is a close-knit community," she said. "Sometimes it takes a while for new students to fit in." "This is not about fitting in," Nyla replied evenly. Mrs. Carroll's smile was thin. "I understand, but stirring things up might make it harder. The Cole family has done a lot for the school. Perhaps let things settle. Choose your moments." The message was clear, wrapped in polite language. Do not push. Nyla's fingers brushed the bracelet at her wrist. She stood, thanked the counselor, and walked out without another word. The rest of the day passed under a haze of watchfulness. Ethan and Brent seemed to materialize at odd corners, sometimes speaking, sometimes just occupying the space she needed to cross. Luke's presence was quieter, but he was there, always a few steps back, a silent witness. By the final bell, the weight of their attention had grown into something solid, pressing at her shoulders. She moved quickly toward the exit, weaving through the flow of students spilling into the afternoon light. That evening, in the small quiet of her bedroom, Nyla set her phone on the desk beside her books. The bracelet lay snug against her skin. She opened the screen to check her messages. One thread in particular caught her eye, a group chat she had never been part of but now saw through a screenshot forwarded anonymously. The profile pictures were familiar: jerseys, helmets, the Ridgeview football emblem. The conversation was short, the words blunt. "Tomorrow we teach her a lesson." Brent's name was attached to the first line. Ethan's reply came next. "Make it clear." Several others chimed in with short affirmations. Near the bottom, one name stood out: Luke Harmon. He had sent no words, only read the thread. No objection, no encouragement. Nyla stared at the screen for a long moment, the glow casting faint shadows across her desk. Somewhere in the quiet, the thought repeated itself, steady as a drumbeat. Not fear, choosing the battle. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, each pool of light marking the soft edges of the neighborhood. Inside, the walls seemed closer, the air still. Somewhere in the dark corners of Ridgeview High, the next move was already being planned, and now she knew it was coming. The third day began like the others, with the metallic clang of lockers and the muffled hum of voices sliding along the hallways. Nyla had learned the rhythm of Ridgeview High in only a few mornings, the way the corridors swelled with bodies between classes, the way voices carried in the long-tiled stairwells, the way silence could be just as loud as words. Her father's bracelet pressed lightly against her skin, its texture a constant reminder. By mid-morning, she was carrying her chemistry book and a folder of neatly written notes toward the second-floor stairwell. The hallway narrowed before it opened to the landing, forcing everyone through the same space. It was here, in the bottleneck, that the air shifted. Ethan Cole was waiting at the top of the stairs, his broad figure cutting a clean line against the light from a high window. His arms were loose at his sides, but his stance was fixed, shoulders square, weight settled evenly, as if he were part of the architecture. Behind him, a few steps down, Brent Dawson leaned casually against the railing, his eyes following Nyla with the focus of a sprinter waiting for a starting gun. Students moved past on either side, their chatter dipping into a curious hush. Nyla kept her pace even, the edges of her skirt brushing against her knees, her gaze steady on the space just beyond Ethan. "Brooks!" Ethan called, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "We should talk!" "I am on my way to class," Nyla replied, her tone even. He stepped slightly to the left, enough to block her path. "This will not take long." She was close enough now to see the faint smirk on his lips, the careful placement of his feet. Her father had taught her to read such things, not just expressions, but posture, weight, balance. Ethan's weight was forward, anchored for confrontation. From the side, Brent moved. The shift was subtle, just a pivot of his hips, a sweep of his leg. His sneaker slid across the floor in a smooth arc, toes angled, sole turning like a door on a hinge. The edge of his foot clipped against Nyla's ankle, the sudden friction stealing her step. The world tilted. Her chemistry book slipped, pages flaring. But muscle memory surged before fear could. Nyla's core tightened, her free hand bracing against the air. She twisted her body just enough to roll with the fall, her shoulder dipping toward the landing. The motion bled away the momentum, turning what could have been a tumble down the stairs into a controlled slide to the side. Her knees bent, feet catching the floor with a muted thud. Gasps rose, followed by the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. Several phones were lifted, their dark lenses glinting like watchful eyes. A laugh broke from somewhere high in the stairwell, sharp, short, the sound of someone enjoying a scene rather than understanding it. Nyla straightened slowly. The dust from the landing clung faintly to the hem of her skirt. She collected the scattered pages of her folder without looking at anyone, her movements steady, unhurried. From the edge of her vision, she caught a flicker, Sierra Walsh on the steps above, one hand resting on the railing. Their eyes met for half a second. Sierra's gaze faltered. She looked away, focusing on something far behind Nyla, her expression unreadable. Ethan stepped closer. "Careful," he said, his tone coated in false concern. "These stairs can be dangerous." Brent's grin widened. A few students chuckled under their breath, the sound pooling in the space between the three of them. Nyla exhaled through her nose, her palm brushing against the bracelet on her wrist. The fabric was warm now, carrying the memory of her father's fingers tightening the knot that morning. Not fear, she reminded herself, choosing the battle. She lifted her head and looked directly into Ethan's eyes. The noise of the hallway seemed to recede, leaving only the stillness of the moment between them. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the stairwell with the clarity of glass striking stone. "After school, the parking lot behind the gym." The words hung in the air, heavier than the laughter that had preceded them. Ethan's smirk faltered just enough to show the shift. Brent's expression froze into something more guarded. Around them, the onlookers reacted, a few whispers, a sharp intake of breath, the rustle of shoes on tile. Nyla gathered her books into her arms and stepped past them, descending the stairs without looking back. The crowd parted to let her through, their faces a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Somewhere, another phone camera lowered, the screen already capturing the end of something and the beginning of something else. Behind her, the stairwell filled again with voices, but the echo of her challenge lingered, threading itself into the hum of the day. By the time she reached the ground floor, she knew the words would travel faster than she could. The decision had been made, and now there would be no stepping away. Rumors do not move in straight lines. They ripple, scatter, and multiply, bouncing from one voice to another, gathering speed like wind funneled through narrow streets. By the time Nyla reached her locker after the last class, the air of Ridgeview High was already charged with something electric. Her challenge in the stairwell, just 7 words, had leapt beyond the walls where it was spoken. It traveled down corridors, across lunch tables, through messages passed in whispered fragments, phones lit up with hasty texts. She called him out, after school, behind the gym. By the next bell, the words Ethan versus Nyla were on lips that had never spoken her name before. The story changed with each telling. Some said Ethan had started it. Others claimed Nyla had stepped into his path. A few described the sweep of Brent's foot with theatrical exaggeration, as if he had nearly sent her tumbling down 2 flights of stairs. But one detail stayed the same. At the end, she had set a time and a place, and Ethan had not refused. By the final period, Nyla could feel eyes on her wherever she went. In class, a boy she did not know sat with his phone tilted just enough to capture her profile. In the hallway, 2 girls whispered, their gazes sliding toward her and then away as if she were something too bright to look at directly. The school's usual rhythm, footsteps, locker doors, the hum of casual conversation, was laced with an undercurrent of anticipation, a beat too quick to be ignored. When the dismissal bell rang, Nyla moved with the same measured calm she had carried all week. She walked past clusters of students still buzzing with speculation and stepped into the pale afternoon light where her father's sedan waited. Malik Brooks had the garage door open when they arrived home. The scent of motor oil and clean mats mingled in the air. Their garage was not for cars, it was a training space, a private gym where discipline was measured in sweat and silence. Black mats covered the floor, a heavy bag hung from a reinforced beam, and a rack of gloves and pads lined one wall. Sunlight streamed through a high window, tracing long rectangles across the floor. Nyla set her bag down and sat on the edge of the mat to remove her shoes. Malik was already inside, standing near the heavy bag, his arms folded. "I heard something today," he said without turning. She did not answer immediately, focusing on aligning her shoes neatly beside the mat. "And what did you hear?" "That my daughter issued a challenge," Malik replied, his voice steady. "After school, to the captain of the football team." Nyla met his gaze. "He left me no choice." Malik stepped closer, his presence filling the space without effort. "There is always a choice. A warrior does not fight to prove herself. She fights only when there is nothing else left." "I am not trying to prove anything," Nyla said. "I am trying to end this." His eyes searched hers for a long moment, weighing her words. "If you step onto that asphalt, you must be ready for what follows. The fight is never only in the moment. It lives after, in the way people see you, the way they decide what you are." "I know," she said quietly. Malik nodded once, then walked to the rack of gloves, adjusting them as if they needed his attention. "Control first," he said. "Strike later." Her fingers brushed the bracelet on her wrist. "Control first," she echoed. While Nyla moved through her quiet preparations, a different conversation unfolded across town. In the boys' locker room of the gym, Brent Dawson leaned against a row of lockers, scrolling through messages on his phone. His voice carried in the mostly empty space. "So, what happens if she gets the upper hand out there?" Luke Harmon sat on the bench, elbows on his knees, tying the laces of his sneakers. He did not look up. "She will not. Humor me," Brent said. "If she does, we step in. Make sure Ethan does not walk away looking bad." Luke tightened one lace, then the other, still not meeting Brent's eyes. "It is between them." Brent gave a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Between them? You know how this works. If Ethan's reputation takes a hit, the whole team takes a hit. You are on the team, Luke. That means you." Luke stood, pulling his jacket on with deliberate slowness. "I am not doing anything stupid," he said finally. Brent's grin thinned into a line. "We will see." Across campus, Ethan Cole's phone vibrated as he left the weight room. The message was from his father, Robert Cole, short, precise, and leaving no room for misinterpretation. Do not let yourself lose. Not in front of a camera. Ethan stared at the words, the weight of them heavier than any barbell. His father's voice seemed to speak through the screen, measured, firm, carrying the authority of a man who never asked for explanations, only results. He could already picture the crowd that would gather, phones raised, recording every move, every breath. A single misstep, replayed on social media, could live forever. His father had built their family name in this town on power, money, and image. Losing was not an option. Not here, not to her. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket, jaw tightening. Outside, the late afternoon sun was sinking toward the trees, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Tomorrow, those shadows would stretch across a different scene, and everyone would be watching. The air behind the Ridgeview High Gymnasium had a different weight that afternoon, dense and expectant, as if the space itself had been holding its breath since the bell rang. The sun hung low enough to paint the asphalt in long stripes of shadow, but its heat still clung to the air, making every surface radiate a faint shimmer. They came in twos and threes at first. Students who had heard the whispers in the halls, their eyes bright with the thrill of something unsanctioned. Then came more, the trickle turning into a current, until the narrow lane behind the gym opened onto a circle of nearly 70 bodies. The smell of dust, faintly metallic from the sun-baked ground, mixed with the restless murmur of voices. At the center of that space, Nyla Brooks stood with her hands in the pockets of a dark hoodie. The hood was up, shadowing her eyes, her posture loose but anchored. The garment hid the clean lines of her movement, the coiled readiness beneath. She was aware of the phones already lifted at the circle's edge, their small lenses catching every detail. From the opposite side, Ethan Cole stepped forward. He had changed out of his practice gear into a fitted athletic shirt and track pants, colors bold against the dark asphalt. The look on his face was practiced, half smirk, half certainty. Though Nyla caught the slight clench in his jaw as his gaze swept over the crowd. Brent Dawson hovered a step behind him, arms crossed, eyes moving between Nyla and the nearest students, as if calculating routes. Luke Harmon stood further back, hands in his pockets, his long frame leaning just enough to suggest distance without detachment. Nyla stepped forward until the space between them was clear of anyone else. Her voice, when it came, cut clean through the noise. No one steps in, no weapons. We stop only when one of us says, stop. A murmur ran through the crowd. It was not the language of spectacle, it was the language of rules. Even here, even now, she was setting boundaries. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Fine, he said, his tone edged with something between agreement and challenge. She nodded once, then drew her hands from her pockets. The hoodie fell open, revealing the crimson of her fitted top beneath, the pleated skirt catching the light when she shifted her stance. The sight drew a few audible gasps from the crowd, not at the color or the cut, but at the sudden shift from concealment to clarity. The hoodie had been a sheath, now the steel beneath was visible. The circle tightened, the sound of feet scuffing against asphalt blending with the low hum of anticipation. Nyla could feel the ground under her soles, the texture of grit and faint cracks, the way it would shift slightly under fast movement. She let her weight sink lower, knees soft, spine aligned, breathing even. Her father's voice was in her ear without sound. Control first, strike later. Ethan rolled his shoulders once, the smirk returning in careful increments. Around them, the voices rose, a low tide pulling back before a wave. Nyla's eyes locked on his center line. Not on his eyes, not on his shoulders, but on the place where intention became movement. Somewhere at the edge of the circle, a single cheer broke loose, sharp as a thrown stone. Others followed, the noise swelling into a jagged wall of sound. The asphalt seemed narrower now, the lines of shadow and light converging between them. Ethan took one step forward, then another, the measured pace of someone who wanted to own the space before he acted. The cheer shifted into a chant of his name from a cluster near the gym wall. Nyla's breathing slowed even as her pulse quickened. The air was hotter now, or perhaps it was simply the heat radiating from the gathered bodies. Her fingers flexed once, then stilled. Ethan's pace broke without warning. His weight shifted forward in a surge, every muscle in his frame committing to the rush. The noise from the crowd fractured into a roar, phones angling upward, voices shouting over one another. In that fraction of a heartbeat, Nyla sank deeper, her center of gravity dropping toward the earth. The asphalt met her stance like an anchor, steadying her for the collision that was now inevitable. And then, with the sunlight glancing off the edge of her hood and the noise folding into a single, sharpened instant, he closed the final step between them. The noise of the crowd fractured into something jagged as Ethan's first lunge tore through the air. It was not a cautious advance. It was the full commitment of someone who believed speed and force could erase the sting of a rumor before it rooted itself in the hallways. His right shoulder cut a hard diagonal toward her, his lead foot slamming into the asphalt with the weight of an intent too heavy to hide. In the half-beat that followed, Nyla's mind recorded everything with unnatural clarity. The narrowing of his eyes, the tightening of his jaw, the way the tendons in his neck stood out like drawn wires. She did not think. She allowed the memory of countless hours in her father's garage to carry her forward. Her hips turned sharply, her left foot gliding across the gritty surface in a tight crescent. The sole whispered against the dust before settling into place, her body a coil unwinding in perfect control. Her back leg bore her weight like the rooted trunk of a tree, while her hands moved with precision, close enough to feel the air stir off his arm, far enough to avoid his grasp. In that space between their movements, she stole the ground beneath him. Her lead foot slid in and hooked lightly, shifting the balance under his center without jarring impact. It was not brute force, it was a redirection, a subtle theft of stability. His forward drive found nothing to anchor it, and the momentum became his enemy. Ethan's eyes widened as the truth reached him. A truth his body understood before his mind caught up. His chest tipped forward, legs scrambling to catch the weight they had just lost. The asphalt met him with a low, resonant thud, breath leaving in a ragged gust. For a heartbeat, the chant of his name splintered into silence. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the ring of bodies surrounding them. Then came the shuffle of feet, a few sharp intakes of breath, the whisper of someone asking, "Did you see that?" Nyla did not smile. She did not speak. Her stance remained alive, knees bent, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. She knew the first mistake in a fight did not always end it. Pride could make a man stand faster than sense advised. Sure enough, Ethan was already moving, his palms pressing into the pavement as he drew himself upright. His face carried the red flush of effort, but beneath it there was another heat, one that had nothing to do with the sun overhead. His gaze found hers, and this time he did not circle or measure. He stepped in with a directness that cut away the pretense of performance. The crowd sensed the shift and responded. Noise swelled in uneven waves, cheers, calls, and the click of phone cameras catching every angle. Nyla tuned it out, her focus narrowing until only Ethan remained in the world. She watched not his face, but the language of his body, the slight lift of his rear heel, the tightening of his chest, the coiling of his torso into the shape of a strike. The punch came like a door slamming shut, and like any door, it could be stepped through if one saw the opening. Nyla moved into that space before the frame closed. Her body slipped past the arc of his arm, close enough to feel the rush of displaced air graze her cheek. Her left arm curved upward to meet just above his elbow, guiding the force down and away from her center. Her right hand found its place near the ridge of his shoulder, not gripping to pull, but anchoring to steer. The contact was precise, controlled, almost surgical. She used his own drive to bend his path away from its intended target, redirecting him into imbalance once more. Their feet landed in counterpoint, hers finding sure purchase, his skidding just enough to break his stance. Without pause, She lowered her weight, her own body folding into the motion. Ethan's momentum completed the arc she had set, bringing his back toward the ground. The sound of his landing was sharper this time, the crowd's reaction less disbelief than stunned recognition. Her knee rested lightly against the side of his torso, not pressing to cause pain, but firm enough to make his attempts to twist free falter. One hand pinned his wrist to the asphalt, her grip steady without clenching. Her father's lessons played in her head: control without cruelty, dominance without destruction. This was the pause before choice. Ethan's breath came fast, his chest rising and falling beneath her shadow. He turned his face slightly away from the nearest phone camera, as if unwilling to let this image become the one the town remembered. Around them, the circle wavered, caught between awe at her precision and loyalty to their captain's pride. Nyla's breathing was steady, her pulse strong but measured. Under her palm, she felt the subtle tensing of his arm, the small shifts that spoke of testing her hold. She did not answer with more pressure. The point was already made. Control, not punishment. The murmur of the crowd deepened, and then a new vibration moved through it. A ripple of awareness traveling faster than speech. Nyla caught it in her peripheral vision. The break in the circle, the purposeful strides cutting toward her from the left. It was Brent Dawson. His pace was longer than Ethan's, each step deliberate and building. His arms swung low, fingers flexing once before curling into loose fists. His mouth was drawn in a flat line, his gaze locked on her as if nothing else existed in the world but the space she occupied. She did not rise. She did not release. Only her head turned, just enough for Brent to see her face, the calm set of her features, the unwavering focus in her eyes. It was not defiance born of anger, but a statement carved in stillness. She was not finished here. Between them, the afternoon light stretched across the asphalt like a drawn boundary, daring him to cross. The air pressed in, warm from the bodies surrounding them, heavy with the weight of unspoken decisions. Nyla felt the heat of the pavement under her knee, the faint tremor in Ethan's arm, the energy of the crowd bracing for whatever would come next. She held her place, the knot of the bracelet biting gently into her wrist, a reminder that every choice in a fight mattered, not just the blows, but the silences between them. And in that silence, the question hung: would Brent take another step? Brent's shadow bled into the sunlit asphalt, stretching wider and sharper with every deliberate stride. The crowd felt it before Nyla even looked up. The shift in the air when a third force enters a two-person rhythm. The noise changed. It no longer pulsed with the uneven cadence of cheering. It became a deeper vibration, a rumble of curiosity and hunger. People leaned forward, necks craning, sensing that something was about to bend the scene toward chaos. Pinned beneath her, Ethan sensed it too. The tension in his chest grew harder beneath her knee, his ribs expanding in an instinctive surge. He had been searching for an opening since she put him on the ground, and now that opening walked toward them with heavy footfalls. Nyla's awareness split and reformed in an instant, Brent's long frame cutting the sunlight from the left, Ethan's hips shifting beneath her. She recognized the intent in both without needing words. Brent's gait was purposeful, but not hurried. He was committing to the space in the same way a predator commits to the distance before the pounce. Ethan's muscles coiled beneath her, a silent countdown toward an explosive roll. Her body made the choice before her mind finished the calculation. She did not rise to meet Brent. Rising would mean surrendering her leverage over Ethan. Instead, she adjusted within the geometry she already owned. Her left knee slid across the asphalt just enough to change her angle, pivoting her center of gravity away from the force Ethan was building. The crowd shifted to follow her movement, the small stones embedded in the pavement grinding faintly under the shift of weight. Her right foot extended, toes brushing the warm grit, until they found the space in front of Brent's lead step. It was a placement no larger than the breadth of a shoe, but she set it with the precision of a key turning in a lock. Her shin became a quiet barricade where his path had been wide open. Brent did not see it until it was too late. His stride met her placement, and the hidden architecture of his own momentum betrayed him. His lead foot caught against her leg, his knee buckling forward before his torso could adjust. The sudden hitch sent his upper body tilting, his arms snapping out instinctively. His fingertips grazed the pavement in a shallow scrape, the sound like sandpaper against wood. A collective gasp rippled through the circle, the kind of sound that rises when an audience sees someone's certainty stolen. Brent caught himself, but the stumble had stripped the easy arrogance from his face. Ethan used the disruption to act. His hips surged upward, his shoulders twisting beneath her. Nyla moved to counter, but the angle forced her right hand to bear more weight than it should. The pain came sharp and clean, blooming at the joint of her wrist and radiating upward in a hot line to her forearm. It was not the deep ache of a bruise, it was the sting of something small but precise, the kind of injury that whispered warnings about overuse. Her breath caught in her chest, but her expression did not falter. She shifted at once, sending the work of control back to her legs and core. Her father's voice surfaced in her mind, calm and absolute. Control is not how hard you hold, it is how well you place yourself. Nyla lowered her weight, her spine aligned over Ethan's center. Her good hand maintained a secure, unstrained grip on his wrist, while her knees anchored her in place. Ethan's renewed efforts turned frantic, each push of his hips like a wave breaking against a seawall. The energy passed through her without unseating her. Brent, still on one knee, glared at the ground as though it had conspired against him. His breath came in uneven pulls, his knuckles whitening as his fists closed and opened again. Around them, the spectators had drawn tighter. Phones were lifted higher now, tilting to catch her face in profile, the lines of her posture, the clean balance of her control. In that moment, she realized she could end it. She could press her knee harder into Ethan's ribs, collapse his breath, hold him until the fight bled out of him entirely. It would be decisive. It would be satisfying to some of the faces watching, but satisfaction was not the same as victory. She had not trained for cheers. Instead, she eased. The pressure of her knee softened, her grip on his wrist loosening enough to tell him without words that she was offering a way out. "Dung Hei Tip?" she asked, the words clear and calm, carrying through the hush that had fallen over the crowd. The sound of his breathing was loud in that quiet space. Ethan froze, his eyes flicking to hers with something unreadable, pride wrestling with pragmatism. Brent's gaze darted between them, calculating the meaning of what he had just witnessed. Power without humiliation. Dominance tempered by choice. Nyla waited, the bracelet on her wrist pressed into her skin, the knot biting gently as if to remind her of the promise it represented. Her wrist ached with every heartbeat, but she did not show it. Then the moment shattered. The air split with the piercing blast of a whistle, high and sustained. Heads turned toward the gym wall, where a campus supervisor in a navy polo was forcing his way through the students. His voice rose in firm commands. "Break it up! Move back!" The words were blunt instruments, scattering the tension like glass underfoot. The crowd's edges wavered. Some students stepped back, muttering. Others stayed rooted, their phones still raised, desperate to capture the last seconds before the circle dissolved. A cluster of lenses moved closer from the front, black screens tilted toward her face. In them she caught her reflection, eyes steady, jaw firm, the hood of her sweatshirt pushed back to bare, the damp strands clinging to her temple. Her pulse was even, her breath measured, but the scene was not finished. Not yet. Somewhere behind that wall of screens, the whistle blew again, sharper, closer, and Nyla did not move. The whistle's shrill echo still trembled in the air when Nyla shifted her weight and rose from Ethan's chest. The decision was not slow. It was a movement both deliberate and immediate, an uncoiling of controlled force, as if she were unwinding a spring that could have stayed loaded for far longer. Her palm pressed briefly against the asphalt for balance, the faint ache in her wrist pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She ignored it. Ethan sucked in a deep breath the moment her knee lifted from his ribs, his chest rising and falling in quick, uneven bursts. His eyes flicked up at her, half defiance, half disbelief, as though he could not quite decide whether to feel spared or defeated. She did not wait for him to decide. She took a step back, placing herself where both Ethan and Brent could see her without obstruction. The circle of onlookers had grown dense enough to block the late morning sun in patches, leaving her standing in a lattice of shadow and light. Her voice carried without shouting, each word carved cleanly from the tension in her chest. "But not I," she said, her gaze sweeping the faces in the crowd. "Lam truck mart toy." The statement was not barked as a threat, but it had the weight of something permanent. It was a marker planted in the ground, a quiet, unshakable border. No one in the ring of students moved or spoke. Even the low murmur of the supervisor's approach seemed to stall for a heartbeat. Somewhere to her right, a phone lowered slightly, its owner blinking, as if the clarity of her tone had punctured the feverish thrill of recording. Ethan rolled to his side and sat up, one hand braced behind him, the other rubbing his ribs. Brent stayed where he was, still half-crouched, one knee on the ground. His eyes were narrowed, his mouth a taut line, but his earlier momentum had drained away. Nyla's gaze lingered on Brent for only a moment before moving past him, through the sea of watching faces, to a figure standing several rows back. Luke. He had not moved the entire time. His shoulders were stiff, hands hanging loosely by his sides, the hood of his sweatshirt shadowing most of his expression. But his eyes, those were unshielded. She caught the flicker there, the brief fracture in the glassy mask. It was not guilt exactly, nor was it shame. It was a kind of recognition, an echo of something long past or long avoided. Regret without words. Nyla held his gaze for 1 second. Maybe 2, then let it go. There was no time to dig into that now. The campus supervisor's voice was closer, firmer. "Step back! Move out of the way!" The circle began to loosen under the pressure. Students shifted, some dispersing, some holding their ground at the edges to steal a last look. She could feel the heat of their eyes, the curiosity wrapping around her like a second skin. And with it, a whispering question already forming in some minds. How did she know to do that? Her answer, if anyone asked, would be simple. True. Her father had taught her, years before the lines of her face began to sharpen into the features she saw in the mirror now. Not to fight for sport, not to win for glory, but to control, to end a threat cleanly. He had trained men and women in uniform, the kind who carried the weight of more than their own safety. And he had trained her, with the same discipline, the same patience, the same demand for precision. She did not speak of him often, and she did not intend to now. The fact did not need to be a banner. It was simply part of her spine, as essential and invisible as the marrow in her bones. Ethan pushed himself fully upright, glancing between her and Brent, as if waiting for some unspoken cue. Brent's jaw worked, but he said nothing. The tension in his shoulders shifted from forward drive to something heavier, the weight of a crowd's silent judgment pressing down. The supervisor's steps were almost at the inner edge of the circle now. The air began to loosen. The watchers who had tasted enough of the scene started to melt away into the larger current of campus life. And then, near the front of the cluster, one phone stayed high when others fell. Its lens was fixed not on the fight in full, but on her. On a very specific sliver of time, the moment she had moved toward Ethan, the moment her shadow had crossed into his, before anyone watching could see the lead-up. The angle was close enough to catch the tightening of her jaw, the focus in her eyes, the sudden press of her shoulder forward. There was no frame before it, no frame after. Just the single beat where she appeared to initiate. The student holding the phone grinned faintly, thumb moving, as if tagging or saving. The reflection of her own face stared back at her from the dark glass, stripped of context. Nyla did not see the upload happen, but somewhere inside the crowd, a spark had been lit that would burn differently from the truth she had just lived. By the time the lunch period ended, Nyla's name was no longer just a sound exchanged between students who had been there. It was a headline running through dozens of private group chats, whispered in hallways, and flashing across the screens of phones she could not see. The first video to spread was the full version. It showed everything. Ethan's initial lunge, Brent's sudden intervention, Nyla's precise redirection of force, and, most tellingly, her choice to release. The crowd's reaction was almost unanimous. In that version, she was a calm storm, measured and unshakable, a wall that stopped the wave without breaking it. But not long after, another version appeared. This one began not with Ethan's shove or Brent's advance, but with Nyla already stepping forward, the angle cutting so tightly that the viewer could not tell what had led to that moment. Her movement looked aggressive. The clarity of her release was absent, the context of defense stripped away. In the clipped narrative, she was no longer the anchor against violence. She was the one initiating it. The two videos moved like parallel rivers through the school. Those who saw the first felt one truth. Those who saw the second believed another. And some, seeing only one, never thought to search for the other. By late afternoon, an email from the vice principal's office appeared in Nyla's inbox. You are hereby required to attend a disciplinary hearing scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. The subject line was short, almost sterile, but the subtext hummed with cold accusation. Her mother was still reading the email aloud when the phone rang. It was the mother of a younger student, her voice pitched high with indignation. We cannot have that kind of violence on school grounds, she said, as though the matter were already settled. She had not seen the full video, only the clipped one. She did not ask for Nyla's side. Nyla listened from across the kitchen, each word carving a slow line in the space between them. Her mother's responses were measured, but Nyla could hear the tightening in her tone. Every repetition of my daughter acted in self-defense felt like throwing stones at a tide. Elsewhere, in another house where the blinds were drawn against the evening light, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed. The screen in his hand replayed the moment over and over, Nyla's body moving with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Each replay made the knot in his stomach twist tighter. He had not been injured, not really, but something had cracked inside him that the bruises on his ribs could not explain. His friend's messages were slower now, thinner. A girl he had been dating for 3 months had sent a short text that felt like a verdict. Why did you go after her in the first place? Ethan did not have an answer he liked. Downstairs, his father's voice carried up the staircase. We need to get in front of this, he said, words clipped with the certainty of a man used to directing outcomes. Control the narrative before it controls you. Ethan stared at the door, feeling the weight of that directive. It did not matter what had actually happened. It mattered what people believed. At Nyla's house, she sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop dimmed to keep the room in shadow. She had seen both videos now. She could feel the split they were causing, the slow corrosion of truth into something malleable. The school's online parent forum was usually a quiet place, a space for lost and found announcements and requests for carpool volunteers. But that night, a new thread appeared from a username no one recognized. The profile picture was a generic gray silhouette, the account created only hours earlier. The post contained the clipped video, the same one that erased the first half of the encounter, and a short, sharp line beneath it. This student is a danger to our children. She should be expelled immediately. The replies began stacking like falling dominoes. Some demanded more information, others agreed without hesitation. A few asked for the full story, but their voices were small against the gathering noise. By the time Nyla refreshed the page, the thread had already been viewed hundreds of times. The headline in bold above it felt like a verdict carved in stone. And somewhere in the dark anonymity of the internet, someone was smiling, knowing that pixels could cut as sharply as any blade. The hearing room was colder than Nyla had expected, as if the air itself had been stored somewhere far from the sun. The blinds were half drawn, slicing the morning light into narrow bands that fell across the long table at the center. She sat at one end, her mother beside her, their chairs facing the array of authority on the opposite side. At the head sat Mrs. Whitaker, the principal, her posture as straight as the back of her high-backed chair. To her right, a man in a charcoal suit with a school district lapel pin, Mr. Fallon, the district's legal counsel, was arranging papers into precise stacks. On Mrs. Whitaker's left sat the school board's representative, a heavy-set man with a close-cropped beard. Nyla recognized him from the hallway where Ethan often lingered between classes. This was Mr. Cole, Ethan's father. The sight of him settled in Nyla's chest like a stone. His eyes did not meet hers. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken positions. On the far wall, a large screen flickered to life, frozen on the first frame of the video that had divided the school. Mrs. Whitaker's voice was steady, each word wrapped in institutional calm. "We are here to determine the facts regarding the incident in the cafeteria. Miss Nyla Brooks, you will have the opportunity to speak after we review the evidence presented by the district." "How?" The click of the remote was louder than it should have been. The edited clip began to play, starting with Nyla's forward movement, her step toward Brent, her hands already engaged. In this version, there was no Ethan lunging first, no shove that had brought her off balance, no moment where she had redirected force rather than created it. The silence in the room was pierced only by the sound of chairs creaking as the adults leaned in to watch. When the video ended, Mr. Fallon folded his hands. "This footage, obtained from a student's device, is the only version verified for authenticity at this time. We cannot admit the other files submitted to the office yesterday due to the absence of verifiable metadata. Without confirmation of its source, it cannot be considered official evidence." Nyla's mother straightened in her seat. "That other file is the truth." Mr. Cole's voice entered for the first time, smooth and deliberate. "What we must remember is that perception matters in these situations. Our priority is the safety of the student body. If a student appears to initiate physical confrontation, that has consequences." The words felt sharp, though they were coded in civility. Then came the deeper cut. Mrs. Whitaker glanced at a folder in front of her. "Miss Brooks, I have also been informed that your father, Mr. Malik Brooks, holds a seasonal training contract with the school's athletic department." She paused just long enough for the implication to form. "The district hopes to resolve this matter cooperatively, so that relationships between staff and administration remain positive." Nyla's mother's hand tightened on her arm. She did not have to look at her daughter to know the message was clear. If you do not give them resistance, your father's contract might survive. Nyla could feel the bracelet around her wrist, the thin silver band her father had given her on her 15th birthday, engraved on the inside with 4 words, "Truth does not tremble." She slid it off slowly, her fingers moving with the certainty of someone preparing to place a piece of herself on the table. The metal made a soft sound as it touched the wood. She lifted her eyes to meet Mrs. Whitaker's. "You are asking me to be silent in exchange for my father's work, but silence is not the truth. You have only shown half of what happened. The other half explains why I moved the way I did. Without it, you are telling a story that is not real." Mr. Fallon shifted in his chair, but she did not let her voice waver. "I acted because someone else acted first. I stopped when I knew the threat was over. If that is not what you want in a student, then say so plainly." The room was quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Mrs. Whitaker's expression did not change, but her pen moved slowly across a page. "The decision of this hearing is as follows. You are to be suspended for 5 school days, effective immediately. The matter of expulsion will remain under consideration, pending further review." The finality of the words was like a door closing in her mind. Her mother's hand was still on her arm, but now it felt more like a tether than a comfort. As the chairs scraped back and the adults began to gather their papers, Nyla noticed a figure near the back of the room, Sierra. She had been quiet through the entire proceeding, her expression unreadable. Now, her gaze found Nyla's, and something in it shifted. For a moment, Sierra looked as if she might turn away. But instead, her fingers closed tightly around the phone in her hand, the knuckles whitening, as though she were holding back a decision that could tilt the balance against the tide of voices outside that door. The room emptied. But that image stayed with Nyla. The sight of someone caught between the comfort of the crowd and the weight of doing what was right. The hallway outside the main office was nearly empty when Nyla stepped out, her suspension letter folded tightly in her hand. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, and her footsteps echoed in a space that felt much larger than it truly was. She was halfway to the doors when a voice called softly from behind. "Nyla, wait." Sierra stood at the corner where the stairwell met the hall, her shoulders drawn in as if she were bracing against a wind only she could feel. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sierra crossed the floor quickly, her shoes making light, careful sounds. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice low but steady. "That day on the stairs, I heard them corner you. I saw the way Brent started it, and I froze." Her eyes were bright, but not with tears. There was something harder there, a kind of resolve that comes only after regret has had time to sharpen. "I thought keeping my head down was the safest thing. But safe is not the same as right." Nyla searched her face, looking for hesitation. "Why now?" "Because I have the full clip." Sierra glanced over her shoulder, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "And I have a friend, Madison, who was standing near the vending machines. She saw everything. She is willing to speak if I stand with her. We can submit both the video and her statement together." The words landed with the weight of something that could change the trajectory of the fight. Nyla nodded once. "Then let us make sure they cannot ignore it." Sierra's relief was visible, but there was still a shadow in her gaze. "It will not make me popular, but maybe popularity was never the point." They parted at the doors, Sierra turning toward the media center to retrieve the file, Nyla toward the parking lot where the November air was brittle against her skin. She had not reached the end of the walkway before another figure stepped into her path. Luke. His hands were shoved into his jacket pockets, but his eyes were restless, moving from her face to the ground and back again. "I need to tell you something," he began. "Brent. He made me delete the original video from my phone. Said if I did not, he would make sure my position on the team was gone by the end of the week." Nyla felt her jaw tighten. "And you did it?" I did," Luke admitted, his voice faltering for a second. "But what he did not know was that my phone automatically backs up to my cloud account. I still have it. He hesitated, swallowing. "I did not think I had the courage to use it. Until now." The admission was not a clean absolution, but it was a step. Nyla could see in him the same weight she had seen in Sierra, people learning, too late, what silence costs. "Send it to Sierra," Nyla said. "She is bringing hers forward. Together, it will be harder for them to twist the truth." Luke nodded, his relief faint but real. "I will." That evening, the cafeteria's fluorescent glare and the echo of raised voices replayed in Nyla's mind. But the scenes that followed came from elsewhere. In the Cole household, the living room was lit only by a pair of wall sconces, their light pooling over the heavy furniture. Ethan stood near the fireplace, still wearing the jacket of his letterman uniform, though the captain's insignia had been stripped away earlier that afternoon. His father was seated in the leather armchair opposite him, hands steepled. "You embarrassed this family today," Mr. Cole said, his voice low but edged with something cold. "Do you know how many calls I have fielded? How many people are asking why my son was removed as captain?" Ethan's shoulders were squared, but his voice was not defiant, it was deliberate. "Because I let Brent do what he did. Because I stood there and let it happen." "You are supposed to lead," Mr. Cole pressed, "not indulge in guilt, and you are certainly not supposed to undermine your team or your school in public. Do you have any idea what happens if this story continues. Our sponsorships vanish. The boosters pull back. I will not have our name dragged through the mud because you cannot control the narrative. The word narrative hung in the air, as sharp as any order. This is not about narrative, Ethan said, his voice tightening. It is about what actually happened. Mr. Cole's gaze hardened. You will remember where your loyalties lie, Ethan, or you will lose more than a title. You will lose the opportunities I have built for you. Do you understand me? The silence between them stretched, brittle as glass. Then Ethan turned toward the stairs without another word, leaving his father in the dim pool of lamplight. Later, alone in his room, the weight of his father's warning still heavy in his ears, Ethan stared at his phone. His thumb hovered over Nyla's name for a long moment. The choice before him was not a clean split between right and wrong. It was a fracture that would not heal the same way, no matter which path he took. Finally, he typed, "Tomorrow I will testify against my father." He pressed send. The message left the screen, crossing the silent space between them like a spark dropped in dry grass, ready to set something much larger into motion. The folding chairs in the Maplewood Community Center creaked under the weight of anticipation. Outside, the late autumn sun had already dipped behind the row of sycamores, casting the windows in a dull amber glow. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, a mix of preparation and endurance. Nyla stood near the front, the open space before her cleared for movement drills. Malik adjusted a padded striking target against his forearm, his calm presence radiating like an anchor in a room bristling with undercurrents. A banner behind them read, "Self-Defense Workshop. Know your boundaries. Protect your space." At first, the crowd was silent. Parents, teachers, and a scattering of students filled the first few rows. Nyla could feel their eyes on her, the girl from the video, the name whispered in faculty meetings and threaded through text chains. The clip had become more than evidence. It was an emblem some carried like a flag and others like a warning. Malik began with the basics: stance, awareness, the language of the body that says stop before words ever leave the mouth. Nyla demonstrated alongside him, her movements deliberate, her focus not on force but on control. She could feel the shift in the air as people began to follow, imitating the angles of her arms, the grounding of her feet. Then a hand rose from the back row. A woman in a dark wool coat stood, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Are you here to teach our children to fight, or to solve every problem with violence?" The question hung, heavy and loaded. Malik glanced at Nyla, offering the space for her to answer. She took a step forward. "I am not here to glorify what happened in that cafeteria. What I did was not a victory, it was a limit. Self-defense is a boundary, not a solution for everything. It is what you do when every other option has been taken from you." She paused, letting the words settle. "The goal is not to hurt. The goal is to protect yourself long enough to be safe." A murmur spread through the crowd, neither fully approval nor dissent, just the sound of people considering something they had not expected to hear. From the third row, a man with silver hair and a weathered face stood. His jacket bore the logo of a local construction company. "My daughter's name is Sophia," he said, his voice carrying a quiet force. "She is 12. She has been followed home twice this year. She told me she wants to quit walking to school, but we cannot afford to drive her every day. I want her to know what you are teaching here. Thank you." The applause that followed was not thunderous, but it was steady, growing as a few parents nodded and others began to speak. A girl in a green hoodie raised her hand hesitantly. "People shove me into lockers between second and third period. I thought it was just how things are." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "Seeing someone fight back, it makes me think maybe I do not have to just take it." Another student spoke, then another. Each story added a small current of solidarity to the room, threading strangers together in a way no policy meeting had managed to do. By the time the workshop ended, the center's light had shifted to the harsh white of overhead bulbs. The mats were stacked, the chairs folded back into their racks. Malik busied himself with returning equipment to the storage room while Nyla gathered her bag. That was when her phone vibrated. She almost ignored it, expecting another well-meaning but exhausting message of support or outrage. But the screen told a different story. An unknown number. No words in the preview, only an image attachment. She opened it, her breath caught. It was the doctored clip. The same one that painted her as the aggressor, cut free from the context that showed Brent's shove. Beneath it, in bold, white text over a black background, was the message, "The full clip disappears tonight." The words pulsed in her vision, each beat of her heart sinking with the silent threat. Somewhere in the quiet of the now empty room, the chair legs scraped against the floor as Malik returned. "Everything all right?" he asked. Nyla locked the phone, sliding it into her pocket. The metal taste of adrenaline was already in her mouth. "No," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "It is just beginning." The conference room on the second floor of the district administration building smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper. Rain slid down the tall windows in slow, deliberate streaks, softening the view of the town beyond. A long table divided the room into two camps, school board members on one side, the students and their families on the other. The air was taut, like the last second before a starting gun. Nyla sat in the middle row of chairs behind Malik, her hands folded in her lap. Sierra sat to her right, Luke to her left, both close enough that their shoulders nearly touched hers. At the far end of the room, Ethan stood alone, his posture rigid, eyes fixed forward. His father, Mr. Cole, leaned back in his chair at the board's end, the polished veneer of confidence still intact, though a muscle in his jaw worked in measured irritation. The chairwoman called the meeting to order. "We are reconvening this disciplinary hearing to consider new evidence." Sierra rose first. Her voice was steady, though her fingers tightened briefly on the flash drive in her palm. "This is the unedited recording from the day in question. It includes the events leading up to the confrontation." She placed the drive on the table as if laying down a final card. "I should have submitted this earlier. I regret my silence." Her gaze shifted toward Nyla, and for a moment, the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than the breathing in the room. Luke followed, stepping forward with a worn phone and a printed affidavit. "This is a backup copy stored on my cloud account. I was told to delete the original." He looked straight at Mr. Cole. "By Brent. At Brent's instruction, which I believe was influenced by others." Finally, Ethan stepped forward. No device in his hands, only his voice. "Brent did shove her. I saw it. I was close enough to stop it, and I did not. That was my failure." He glanced at his father. "And I will not be part of hiding it." Mr. Cole's chair shifted forward, the polished wood scraping softly on the tile. "Ethan." But Ethan did not yield. "No, Dad. You told me to control the narrative. You meant control the truth. I will not do that anymore." The room shifted then, as if a current had passed through it. The chairwoman nodded for the clerk to play the footage. The screen flickered to life, showing the cafeteria, the shove, Nyla's measured defense, the space between action and escalation. Every frame contradicted the doctored clip that had haunted the past weeks. When the playback ended, the room did not burst into applause. This was not a victory parade. It was a verdict room. The chairwoman spoke again. "Given the full context, Nyla's suspension will be lifted effective immediately. She will receive a formal warning for participation in a physical altercation. Brent will be placed on athletic probation and required to complete community service hours. Ethan Cole will be removed from his position as team captain for the remainder of the season." Her eyes shifted briefly toward Mr. Cole. "Regarding allegations of conflict of interest, a separate investigation has been opened. Until its conclusion, no further comment will be made." The gavel tapped once, ending the hearing. No one smiled. The reality was neither clean nor triumphant. Justice, when it came, had a weight to it, a price. Outside, in the muted drizzle, Nyla reached into her pocket and drew out the bracelet she had taken off weeks ago. The cord was frayed from wear, the small bead warm in her palm. She slipped it back onto her wrist, but left it loose, the bead resting gently against her skin. Control, she realized, was not a shell to hide inside. It was a choice, moment by moment, to hold what mattered and let go of the rest. The following Monday, the halls of Ridgeview High felt both familiar and subtly altered. Lockers slammed, announcements crackled overhead. But here and there a ripple of change moved through the current. 2 juniors she barely knew nodded in greeting. A freshman offered a quick, almost shy, "Morning, Nyla," before darting into class. Farther down the corridor, Brent stood at his locker, jaw set, eyes fixed on her. The look he gave was not apology, nor open threat, something colder, held back like a storm behind glass. Nyla's phone buzzed in her pocket. She drew it out. A message from an unknown number. One image, the doctored clip again. Beneath it, a single line in bold text. "The story is not over." Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she locked the phone, the black reflection of her own face staring back for a second before she slid it away. Sierra and Luke appeared at her sides, their conversation soft but steady. Nyla fell into step with them, their pace measured, unhurried. In her mind, she held a sentence like a stone, solid and sure. Strength is not in making others fall, it is in what we choose to hold. She kept walking. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the street still held its quiet sheen, as if the world had been rinsed of its sharpest edges. Nyla walked home with her hood down, the wind touching her face in soft, uncertain currents. Every step felt different now, not lighter, not heavier, but more deliberate. The past weeks had not ended in the kind of victory people write songs about. There were no banners, no roaring crowds. What there was something quieter, a stillness that comes only after standing your ground long enough to see where the dust settles. She had learned that truth, when spoken, does not always arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it lands like a stone in the middle of a pond, disturbing the surface, sending ripples outward, changing shapes you cannot yet see. The system had bent, but not broken. People had stepped forward, but not without fear. And for every hand that had reached for hers, another had pulled away. She understood now that change is not a clean arc, but a stubborn climb, one foothold at a time. Her bracelet shifted loosely on her wrist, the bead warm from her skin. She thought about what it meant to protect, rather than avenge. How easy it would have been to let her anger write the ending for her. But anger, left unchecked, builds prisons of its own. True strength, she knew now, was not measured by the number of times you make someone fall, but by the moments you choose to stand, even when no one claps for it. Some will watch her walk through the halls tomorrow and see only the girl who fought back. Others will see the one who refused to disappear. Both will be right, but neither will know the whole of it. Only she will know the weight of that choice and the cost of carrying it. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us, that courage is not a single act, but a pattern we choose to keep weaving, even when the threads fray. That the smallest decision, to speak, to stand, to step forward, can echo far beyond the walls we know. If you have ever faced your own moment at the edge, when staying silent felt safer, but your heart ached for truth, then you know this story is not only hers. It belongs to anyone who has been told to shrink and chose, instead, to stand tall. I would love to hear the moments that shaped your strength. Share them in the comments. Your voice might be the light someone else needs. And if this journey has stayed with you, consider staying with us too. There are more stories ahead, and you will not want to miss the next one. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do is keep walking together.